The main hall of Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with its usual chaos. People rushed in every direction, children pulled colorful rolling bags, and executives typed furiously on their smartphones while glancing at flight boards. Amid that frantic crowd, one man walked at a steady, almost unbothered pace. He wore a plain black t-shirt, worn-out jeans, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. No designer watch, no flashy accessories, no security entourage clearing the path. It was Keanu Reeves. A few people gave him curious glances, uncertain. Could it be? Flickered in their eyes. But most didn't recognize him. He passed by like any other traveler, maybe even one who seemed slightly out of place in such a polished environment. One detail, however, stood out from his understated look. Around his neck, hanging loosely, a small silver crucifix glinted gently under the airport lights. It wasn't large or flashy, but it had presence. There was something about that piece, something heavier than its size. Keanu moved forward without arrogance, without hiding, just being himself. When he reached the first-class gate, he stepped into the priority line and handed his ticket to the flight attendant on duty. His name was printed clearly on the boarding pass, but the man in front of him, polished posture, perfect uniform, sharp gaze, hesitated for a second. Ethan Drake, his name tag read. A relatively new hire who prided himself on maintaining order and professionalism. He looked down at the ticket, then back at Keanu, his brow slightly furrowed. Sir? He paused, then added, I think you're at the wrong gate. This line is for first class. Keanu didn't look surprised or offended. He simply replied with a calm smile, I'm at the right gate. Ethan checked the ticket again. It was legitimate. The name was correct. He knew who Keanu Reeves was, of course, but he hadn't recognized him at first. His casual appearance, the worn sneakers, the complete lack of celebrity aura, didn't match the profile he was used to seeing in first class. Even after confirming his identity, Ethan hesitated. The silent bias had already surfaced. He let Keanu pass, but couldn't help watching him with unease as he walked slowly down the corridor and settled into his first-class seat with ease, like someone who had done this many times before. Ethan continued his duties, but his attention kept returning to Keanu. Maybe it was the contrast, the simplicity where he expected extravagance. Or maybe it was the crucifix, now fully visible as Keanu adjusted his seatbelt. Ethan froze for a moment, his gaze locked on the tiny symbol, and a flash of tension ran across his face. He said nothing at first, but took a step forward, then another. Ethan followed Keanu down the aisle, firm and purposeful. The hum of the aircraft was almost therapeutic as the plane climbed steadily into the sky. The world below became a blur of clouds and sun-glinted rooftops. Inside the first-class cabin, the air was conditioned and crisp. The lights dimmed just enough to suggest comfort without sleep. Keanu sat still in his seat, arms resting on the padded armrests, his breathing measured. He wasn't reading, wasn't watching anything. He was simply being. In the quiet, his presence drew more attention than noise ever could. The silver crucifix around his neck had shifted slightly during takeoff, now resting fully in view atop his plain black shirt. It wasn't bold or polished to perfection. In fact, it looked slightly aged, worn at the edges, as if it had lived through decades of stories. And yet, that simple piece of metal carried more weight than most could imagine. Ethan noticed from the galley. He peeked into the aisle just enough to keep an eye on Keanu. Something about the way Keanu sat there, so calm, so centered, so unapologetically himself, made Ethan uncomfortable, though he couldn't explain why. He had dealt with celebrities before, loud ones, demanding ones, entitled ones, but Keanu didn't fit any of those molds. Still, there was something about him, or maybe about that necklace, that stirred a strange discomfort in Ethan's chest. One he didn't want to name. Moments later, Ethan approached. His posture was professional, calculated. He'd practiced that poise in front of mirrors, in training seminars, and in his own mind every time he had to deal with situations. This wasn't just a flight. It was his domain, and he was determined to uphold its order. "Sir," Ethan began, lowering his voice just slightly, "I'd like to remind you that we have certain policies regarding overt religious symbolism in shared spaces, especially in this cabin. We ask for discretion." Keanu turned to him slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry. Is there a rule I've broken?" Ethan's voice remained soft, but the undertone sharpened. "It's not about breaking rules. It's about creating a neutral environment. Some passengers might find certain symbols divisive." Keanu looked down briefly at the crucifix. "I've flown like this many times before. No one's ever had an issue." Keanu looked down briefly at the crucifix. "I've flown like this many times before. No one's ever had an issue." Ethan hesitated. That wasn't the response he expected. "Yes, well, times are changing. Some travelers feel more sensitive these days. We just ask everyone to be considerate. Perhaps you could tuck it in." His hand gestured vaguely toward the necklace, like he didn't want to point directly, as if the symbol might burn his fingers. Keanu didn't react with anger, but he also didn't comply. "This crucifix isn't a fashion statement. It's not a provocation. It's part of who I am." Ethan forced a smile, the kind used to diffuse, not to connect. "Of course, and we respect that. We simply ask that passengers keep personal expressions discreet, especially in premium cabins." His words, dressed in policy, carried a passive-aggressive bite. The woman in the seat across the aisle looked up, subtly tuning in. A man 2 rows back removed one earbud. The air had changed. Something uncomfortable had started to bloom. Not loud, not chaotic, but palpable. Keanu's voice remained even, controlled. "With all respect, I believe I'm being singled out." Ethan blinked. "Excuse me, if someone else wore a pendant of a tree, a star, or a stone, would you ask them to hide it?" He opened his mouth, closed it, reset. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he cleared his throat, stepped back with a nod, and said, "I'll give you a moment." Keanu looked up again, slower this time. "This necklace has saved my life more than once. In war zones, in hospital rooms, in nights I thought I wouldn't wake from." His voice didn't rise, but it filled the space like thunder in a cathedral. "I won't hide it. Not now, not ever." For the first time, Ethan showed what he was feeling. His frustration, his disbelief. It cracked through the plastic of his customer service expression. It was only a flicker, but it was there, and everyone saw it. Passengers turned. The energy shifted fully now. No longer uncertain, people began forming silent opinions. A man lifted his phone from his lap, pointing the camera discreetly toward the aisle. Another whispered to his partner, "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" But Keanu didn't notice the shift. He wasn't trying to create one. He was simply standing still, holding a boundary. Others thought soft. Ethan, sensing the loss of control, straightened again. "If you refuse, I'll have to escalate this to the captain." "You do what you need to do," Keanu replied calmly, his eyes meeting Ethan's now with quiet strength. "But know this, the problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes." A silence so complete fell over the cabin, it might as well have been outer space. Even Nicole stepped back slightly. Even she felt it, not just the power of the words, but the truth in them. Ethan opened his mouth and closed it again. He had nothing to say, and everyone knew it. Keanu says with firm calm, "This necklace has saved my life more than once, and I won't hide it." Ethan's professional mask cracks, his irritation now fully visible. The plane had reached cruising altitude. Outside, clouds drifted in slow motion beneath the wings. Inside, the first-class cabin hummed with quiet luxury. Reclining seats, champagne flutes, the occasional clinking of silverware. But one corner of the cabin buzzed with a different kind of energy, the aftershock of a confrontation no one had expected to witness. Keanu sat silently in his seat, unmoved. The crucifix still hung over his shirt, resting peacefully above his heart. Ethan returned. His steps, now quicker and more rigid, carried a new edge. He stopped beside Keanu's seat, lips tight, expression neutral. But this time, there was no attempt to disguise the tension in his tone. "Sir, I've received a few comments from other passengers. Some are feeling uneasy." He spoke in that same carefully measured voice, the one that tried to sound objective but couldn't quite hide its undertone. Keanu looked at him calm. "About what?" Ethan paused. The answer was obvious, but he hesitated to say it outright. "About the display of ideological symbols in a shared, enclosed environment. We strive to maintain a space where everyone feels comfortable." Keanu didn't blink. "A symbol of faith makes people uncomfortable?" Ethan took a short, sharp breath. "Imagine if everyone began wearing political pins, religious signs, ideological slogans. It would create division in a space meant for unity." Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice still low but now carrying a deliberate clarity. "Then maybe the problem isn't the symbol. Maybe it's what people have been taught to feel about it." His words echoed louder than his voice. A couple sitting nearby exchanged glances. The man subtly angled his phone, pressing the record button without drawing attention. Ethan, noticing, straightened his posture as if trying to regain authority through stature. "I'm simply following protocol. If you refuse to cooperate, I may have to notify security." Now that got attention. More heads turned. A quiet hush spread over the cabin, the kind that comes when something real, something raw, pierces through the surface of routine. But Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he looked Ethan in the eyes and said, "Call whoever you need to. But understand this. The problem isn't what's on my chest. It's what's in your eyes." Silence. Total. Ethan stared at him, caught in the sudden mirror Keanu held up. Not with judgment, but with clarity. His words weren't aggressive. They were true. And that made them harder to swallow. A flight attendant further back stopped mid-task. The couple continued to film. One or two passengers subtly nodded, though they said nothing. The divide was forming, but it wasn't between faiths or ideologies. It was between perception and reality. Ethan backed away without a word, jaw clenched. He didn't know yet, but the tide had begun to turn. Keanu doesn't back down. "Call whoever you need, but know this. The problem isn't what's on my chest. It's what's in your eyes." The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had changed. What began as subtle tension had turned into something heavier, more electric. The kind of unspoken shift that made people sit up straighter, whisper a little less, watch a little more closely. Keanu still sat quietly in his seat. His silver crucifix rested on his chest, undisturbed and visible. Not as a statement, but as a truth. It hadn't moved. He hadn't moved, but everyone around him had. Ethan stood in the galley, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was no longer just irritated. He was challenged. His authority had been quietly questioned in front of the very passengers whose respect he was trained to command. He could feel the judgment pressing in from multiple directions. Not only from Keanu, but from his own team, and possibly from himself. His fingers tapped against the tablet clipped to his tray cart. The uniform he wore suddenly felt heavier than usual, tighter around the collar. He took a deep breath, then turned sharply. "Nicole, I need you up front with me." The younger attendant blinked, unsure. "Is everything all right?" Ethan gave a tight smile that wasn't really a smile. "We have a situation I'd prefer to handle with protocol. Passenger 2 is refusing to comply with a direct request. I'm escalating." Nicole looked hesitant. "Is it about the necklace?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "It's about setting a precedent." Nicole followed reluctantly. Back at Keanu's row, several passengers pretended to mind their own business, eyes on books or screens, but attention elsewhere. One man near the bulkhead continued to record casually, his phone resting on the armrest, angled just enough to capture the seat across the aisle. Ethan returned to Keanu's side, his stance more rigid than before. Nicole stood just behind him, not speaking, just watching. "Mr. Reeves," Ethan said louder this time, using his full name now that he'd finally recognized who he was. "I'm notifying the captain. If you continue to disregard cabin expectations, we will have to take further measures, possibly even involve airport security upon landing." Keanu slowly turned his gaze to him. "For wearing a necklace?" Ethan flushed. "For refusing a crew member's instruction during an active flight." The words sounded official, rehearsed, but they landed like a lie in a quiet room. More passengers were visibly listening now. There was no scene, no shouting, just the unmistakable sense of a confrontation deepening and the possibility that something important was at stake. Nicole spoke gently. "Maybe we should talk to the captain together before it goes that far." Ethan shot her a look, sharp, disapproving, but it was too late. The moment had shifted. Ethan had tried to wield authority, but what he'd revealed instead was control slipping. The cockpit door opened. 5 minutes later, out stepped Captain Morales, composed, mid-50s, face weathered but kind, the kind of man whose calm you could feel before he even spoke. He walked the aisle with purpose but not haste. When he reached the galley, Ethan stepped forward, speaking quickly. "Sir, we have a passenger refusing to comply with basic decorum. I've asked him multiple times to conceal a religious item that could disturb the cabin atmosphere. He declined. He's escalated it." Morales listened without interrupting, then turned to Nicole. "And what's your perspective?" Nicole hesitated. Keanu's quiet, respectful. He didn't escalate anything. He just didn't want to hide his necklace. Morales nodded, then stepped into the aisle. All eyes followed him. He approached Keanu calmly, hands behind his back, like a professor preparing to speak to a thoughtful student. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Captain Morales. I understand there's been some disagreement regarding a policy. I want to ensure the well-being of everyone on board, crew and passengers included. May I ask for your version?" Keanu looked up, expression still composed, voice steady. "Your attendant asked me to conceal this." He touched the crucifix lightly, saying it might make others uncomfortable. I said no. A pause. "I told him this necklace has been part of my life for years, that it's not a symbol of ideology, but of survival, of faith that held me together when nothing else did. I don't wear it to provoke. I wear it because it reminds me I'm still here." The cabin had gone so still, you could hear the distant click of a seatbelt buckle 3 rows away. Captain Morales listened, and when Keanu finished, he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked back at Ethan. His voice was low but firm. "Did he say anything disrespectful?" Ethan opened his mouth, but words didn't come. He turned to Nicole again. "Anything aggressive?" Nicole shook her head. "No, sir." Captain Morales exhaled, the weight of leadership settling into his next words. The cabin lights had dimmed. But for Ethan, there was no rest. He stood at the back of the aircraft, hidden behind the galley curtain, phone vibrating nonstop in his pocket. He hadn't opened it in the last 10 minutes. He didn't need to. He already knew the video had gone viral. His face, his voice, his words, the way he told Keanu Reeves to hide his crucifix. All of it was online now, being dissected by strangers around the world. His chest tightened, not with panic, but with something deeper, shame. But not because of the backlash, because now he saw it too. The moment replayed in his mind, not from his perspective, but from everyone else's. From Nicole's, from the passengers, from Keanu's. He hadn't been neutral. He hadn't been fair. He had judged him quietly, politely, professionally, and that made it worse. A memory surfaced, his grandmother's voice soft and worn. "Kindness isn't what you say. It's what you choose not to hide." Ethan had spent his whole life hiding, behind policies, behind protocol, behind control. Now there was nowhere to hide. From the cockpit came Captain Morales' voice over the intercom. "This airline is committed to respect, inclusivity, and the freedom to express one's faith without fear or shame." It was subtle, but clear. Everyone knew what it meant. Keanu sat quietly in seat 2A, still composed, the crucifix still visible. He hadn't gloated, he hadn't retaliated, and somehow that hurt more than if he had. Ethan wiped under his eyes and took a shaky breath. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew he had to face it. He stepped out of the galley. The walk to the front felt longer than usual. His lights reflected off polished seats and curious eyes as he approached Keanu's row. The cabin fell into silence. He looked at him, calm as ever. He stopped in front of him. The words didn't come. And so he let his body speak. Ethan slowly lowered himself to his knees. Gasps broke the silence. "I was wrong," he said softly. His voice trembled. "I told myself I was protecting the cabin, that I was being professional, but I was just protecting my own discomfort." Tears welled in his eyes. "I've hidden behind neutrality my whole life. I thought it made me strong, but it just made me blind." He looked up at him. "I'm sorry." Keanu didn't speak for a moment. Then gently he stood and reached out his hand. Ethan took it. He helped him up with quiet grace. The applause faded. The moment lingered. Ethan remained standing in front of Keanu, still shaken, but different now. Open in a way he hadn't been since he first put on the uniform. He felt raw, seen, yet strangely lighter. Keanu was still holding his hand, not to make a point, just to offer presence. Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "I don't know how to undo what I did." Keanu looked at him with kindness. "You don't need to undo it." He released his hand gently. "You faced it. That's more than most ever do." Ethan blinked. The cabin was quiet, still watching, but now no one looked like they were judging him. They looked moved. Keanu gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit if you want." Ethan nodded, sat for a moment, his posture no longer stiff, no longer performing. "I used to believe in something," he said softly. "Before this job, before rules and scripts and fear." Keanu Reeves chooses grace over conflict, quiet faith, loud truth. Flight attendant apologizes mid-air, and the world watches. But Ethan didn't care about the articles, because something else had changed inside him. 2 weeks later, a soft, natural light streamed through the window of a modest apartment. Ethan sat in front of his phone, recording a video. No makeup, no uniform. Just him, in a plain t-shirt. In his hand, he held the small silver crucifix Keanu had given him after the flight, the one he'd worn during it all. He looked into the lens. "I spent years believing professionalism meant hiding who I was." He looked down at the crucifix. "But this reminded me what it means to be human." He smiled. "Today, I don't hide anymore." He paused. "Thank you, Keanu." He ended the recording, and for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The camera stopped recording. He sat there in silence, still holding the cross, not as a symbol of religion, but as a reminder of courage, of grace, of the power of choosing kindness over control.